This is the Iron Sharpens Iron movement, sharing insights into the power of people-centric leading.
Hi, this is Jim, and today we welcome to our tribe a 24-year associate with Franklin Covey and serves as the Executive Vice President of Thought Leadership. He is the host of the world's largest and fastest growing podcast and newsletter devoted to leadership development. He's also the author of a multi-week Amazon #1 new release, a Wall Street Journal bestseller, and writes a weekly leadership column for Inc.com. This is Scott Miller. The Iron Sharpens Iron movement is brought to you by N2 Growth, a leader in executive search, leadership development, and talent management. We find and develop the world's best leaders. Learn more about our practice by visiting us at n2growth.com or click on the link in the show notes of this podcast. Scott, welcome to the Iron Sharpens Iron movement. I know the tribe members are extremely excited to have you here today, so let's start the conversation.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks for the platform today.
Yeah, you've worked for, what is it now, 24 years for Franklin Covey?
Yes, it's kind of insane. My kids think I'm a dinosaur who works for the same company for almost 25 years. I do. My dad did.
There you go. I like that. One of the things that I do when I coach senior executives is, we're always encourage them to, go up and out and move around and have that diversity of experiences. But, my dad worked for IBM for 38 years.
Wow.
I retired out of the military in 30 years. You got 24 years, and I don't think it's a bad thing as long as you're kind of moving around and staying fresh. That's for sure.
Well, that's been my strategy, right? I've been privileged, Jim, to have had 9 distinct different careers geographically and responsibility in one organization. And that's really, it's a luxury, but I've worked hard to try to do that within one company. Not everyone is afforded that same opportunity.
Yeah, that's for sure. And it's a great thing to say that, it's not the title of the company that shows that you've stagnated. It's looking in that resume and seeing it, that you have moved around and all that stuff. So you can work for the same organization as long as you're still moving around and staying fresh, for sure.
Yeah, I think the research now kind of shows that the average attention span someone has, at least in a corporate environment, for one job is about 3 years, regardless of age, and that you start to get anxious. So I think organizations that are interested in retaining top talent need to acknowledge that and even anticipate that before outside recruiters do.
Yeah, absolutely correct. And as the generational shift is happening too, it is starting to become more and more evident that it is in the DNA of everybody now that's in the workforce that you got to move around, have to move around. It's just who we are. It's who we are as people, for sure. So Scott, one of the things I want to talk to you about is you have written many books. You're, a Wall Street Journal best-selling author. You've been on Amazon as a best-selling author on all this, and you've come out recently with a new book called Management Mess to Leadership Success. I love that word. I love the title, but it's kind of scary, right? When you're writing the title of your book and you're writing mess in there.
Yeah, it was very scary. I wrote that very intentionally because I wanted people to realize everyone's got a mess. And the more vulnerable you are, the more you acknowledge it, admit it, you make it safe for others to own theirs. And as a leader inside arguably one of the world's largest, most prestigious, companies in the world, I'm an officer in a public company. Leadership didn't come natural to me. Leadership is hard. It's unrelenting. It's messy. And not everyone should be a leader of people. So I think it's done well because of that title also.
Can I ask you something? Was it deliberate in saying the word management mess and then leadership success?
Yeah.
Were you deliberate in using management and leadership in those two words?
It's a great question. We picked it because it was a great marketing tagline, right? And the fact of the matter is, there are as many arguments around the difference between management and leadership as there are people filling those roles, right? I can stand with the best of them. I can argue most sides. I think what happens is the following. And Harvard Business Review published a research report a few years ago that said, Jim, the average age that someone is receiving their first promotion into management is age 30. And the average age that they're receiving their first formal leadership development training, age 42. So there is a
Wow.
12-year gap, a like scientifically research proven 12-year gap where people who are moving into management on their way to leadership are kind of just phoning it in. They're figuring it out. They're wreaking havoc. So I think I understand the differences intimately after nearly 30 years in the industry, but the fact of the matter is most managers should be better leaders. And there are some leaders who need to be better managers. And I get the whole concept of manage things, lead people, but for us, it kind of rolled off the tongue nicely. It tested well. So that's why, for alliteration purposes, we called it management mess to leadership success. 'Cause I do think most people start their careers as managers, and ideally, they earned their way into a reputation of being a great leader.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love that. And so when you're sitting in it, because I guess organizationally, right? Like with this 12-year gap, I mean, organizationally, they have failed these people, right? We need to, we should relook at how leadership development and the whole pyramid, climbing the pyramid from, within management to leadership, it's kind of failed over the last 20 years. What's your impression of where there has been this failure of developing these people? Why the 12-year gap? Why have all of a sudden, people kind of just kind of treaded water and really faking it until they make it kind of thing, which is a horrible thing to say.
Here's been my experience, and I'll bet many of your tribe will relate to this. Inside organizations, we tend to promote into management leadership roles the top producing individual contributor, right? The most efficient dental hygienist, the most creative digital designer, the top producing salesperson. This is what happens, right? And those people also typically think the only way to move up in an organization, to consolidate influence, to have some power, to earn more money, to earn respect, right? There's this natural gravitational pull up. And so you typically are faced with, should I accept the promotion? And if I don't accept it, then Jim, three cubicles down from me, is going to be my boss next week. So I don't have a choice but to get promoted. So we promote the top producing sales individual producer. But rarely, Jim, do the skills that make you a great salesperson make you a great sales leader. In fact,
Amen.
in fact, they're the opposite. I mean, think about what makes a great salesperson, right? You're you're highly individually motivated. You tend to like to work independently. You like to win and compete, often against your colleagues. You like the limelight, the spotlight. You want to win the chairman's club and be, first on stage at Maui, right? These are actually great skill sets for salespeople. These are horrible skill sets for sales leaders, right?
Amen.
This is why I think most organizations that have sales leaders being players and coaches is generally a bad thing, because you are inherently incenting your sales leader to make their goal so that they look good in the eyes of their sales team, when all of their time should be figuring out how to coach, mentor, and get work done with and through other people to ensure that they stay, not always be eclipsed by their sales leader who's making his or her goal, but maybe at the expense of you helping make your goal. So I have a fundamental challenge with that concept. We too often promote individual producers to become leaders. That's the wrong decision. What we should be doing is looking at clearly, what are the leadership competencies we need in our next leaders. They may or may not come from inside the company. They may or may not come from your star producing digital designer. I mean, what's the correlation between being the best person working in Adobe and managing 12 Adobe designers? There's no correlation other than empathy, perhaps, and that may not even exist. So I think, so go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I'd love to have this. I'd love to stop you at competencies. So, what do you think? And we may get into some of these that are probably exposed, right, within your 30 challenges to become that better leader, that's referenced in your book. But what do you think are some historically core competencies that'll never change? So, since the beginning of time, when the caveman first came out and started to lead their tribe till today, what's some of those competencies that you see that are just enduring, that are just, you got to have them to lead successfully? But here's even the part two to this. What are the competencies that you see in 2020 and moving forward that may be new competencies that aren't even being taught at universities or business schools or anything like that?
Yeah, and I'm not sure that competencies change. Maybe who's teaching them needs to think about changing them. But let's look at what makes a great leader. First is this idea of talking straight, not spinning, not posturing, not positioning, being transparent, right? Second is vulnerability, being able to admit your own mistakes, not being the smartest person in the room, recognizing that you need to be the genius maker of others, not the genius in the room. No one wants to work for a know-it-all. I think
Yeah,
leading difficult conversations is discussing people's blind spots, having the courage and the diplomacy to actually take on the discussables or the undiscussables that might require you to move outside your comfort zone. I think protecting your team from urgencies. Many leaders have a sort of rush in, save the day, get it done mentality. I sure do. I love a good crisis. My best work
sure.
is done in a crisis. And if one doesn't exist, oh, I'll cook one up. I'll elevate something to the level of crisis so I can feel important. And that's not altogether a bad thing unless that is your normal operating culture where everybody now working for you is always in urgency mode because that's where you thrive. I think demonstrating humility. I used to think that humility was a weakness. Actually, humility is born out of confidence. Confident
Yes,
leaders can be humble leaders. Arrogant leaders are incapable of showing humility. Listening, balancing listening with speaking. It's counterintuitive as a leader because we're always taught to clarify, right? Speak and your mission, your vision, your values, your goal, talk more, persuade, influence, and sell. When listening is what creates empathy and relationships. I mean, I think declaring your intent. I love this quote from one of our founders at Franklin Covey. Nearly all, if not all, conflict in life comes from mismatched or unfulfilled expectations. As a leader, you have an agenda, you have motives. People will be suspect of your motives unless you declare them up front what your motive is. Your motive in this performance plan, your motive in this acquisition, your motive in this relocation, your motive in this promotion, right? Is be very clear about declaring your intent. I mean, I could keep going. Recognize that as a leader, you don't have all the facts. You're not always right. You have warped and incorrect paradigms about the industry, about your own skills, about the people on your team. That are you nimble enough and mature enough where you can change your mind, where you are influenceable, that you're giving and providing feedback. You're making it safe for people to give you feedback. I could talk for an hour
yeah.
about competence, but there's 10 that I think everyone should just digest and rank yourself on.
And these are enduring, right? Like, so I guess my point is on these 10 that you just listed, do they work for the first line supervisor, the person that's for the very first time went from doing something very technical to getting some form of supervision? And does it work for the CEO? Does it work at all
Yes,
levels within
of
the
course.
organization?
And
And
including
why?
with your spouse and your mother-in-law and your neighbor and your pastor, right? I mean, yes, these are kind of fundamental challenges that everyone faces in life, both in your personal life and in your professional life. Because you are a CEO at age 38 or age 68, it doesn't necessarily make you more self-aware. It doesn't automatically mean you become a better listener or you have a more abundant mentality or that you understand how to develop relationships. I know a lot of jerks that are 28 and are 68.
You bet.
And so I think these are great reminders to say if you're going to be an influential leader, forget leader or manager. Let's assume they're the same for a moment for the purpose of ease of conversation. You got to realize that in your organization, Jim, people are not your most valuable asset. That's actually some HR bunk cooked up for a conference 20 years ago. People are not an organization's most valuable asset. It is the relationships between your people that are your competitive advantage. Because Jim can be a black belt in Six Sigma, and Scott can have a Rhodes Scholar designation from Oxford. But if Jim and Scott can't get along, they can't complement each other, they can't forgive, or more importantly, forgive each other.
Mm,
I don't need you. I don't need gutless wonders that are, are reckless with each other's reputations and insecurities and confidences. People's relationships together, which basically defines your culture. That's why people stay. People quit bad bosses and corrupt cultures. They don't quit their jobs. So as a leader, these 30 challenges are about making you not a bad boss, but a great boss, and not making your culture corrupt, but making your culture irresistible, where when someone gets a phone call from a recruiter, they say, you know what, I'm interested, but can I tell you, I love my boss, and my boss loves me, and this is a great
Ah.
culture, and I'm staying.
So let me ask you this, Scott. None of these that you've listed are necessarily taught in the MBA course. None of these you need a Harvard
Of course
doctorate
not.
to
Of course
be,
not. Because
right?
most professors haven't owned their own business or been the executive vice president of a public company or led a sales team. Now, not all of them haven't. Some of them have. But
Sure.
these are the things you learn when you are managing a P&L, when you are responsible for hiring and firing people, when you're sitting in front of a client trying to close a six-figure deal or a seven-figure deal. These are raw leadership skills where the rubber meets the road. And I think academia is improving dramatically on bringing onto their professorial staff real life leaders that have faced these challenges. Where you've sat down in a room with one of your employees and had to have a high courage conversation about their body odor or
Yeah.
about their personal hygiene or about their inability to take responsibility when they make mistakes or they blame everyone. These are leadership skills, right? You can learn how to read a P&L online. You can teach cost of goods and supply chain and inventory and EBITDA in any course. What you need to teach is, how do you set vision? How do you convert vision into goals? How do you construct goals? How do you turn goals into actionable behaviors? How do you coach? How do you mentor? How do you build patience? How do you grow your own self-awareness? What are your own blind spots? How do you give feedback delicately to Jim and Scott differently on their different blind spots? These are the talents and roles of a leader that you'll probably never learn in any course until your professor has done them in an organization. For profit, not for profit, ecclesiastical, educational, doesn't matter. Leading people requires you to have led people and or if you're going to teach it to others.
Amen.
Sorry for that crazy train, but I'm passionate about that.
Oh, I listen, you're preaching now, so it's all good.
And
I
I
mean,
think
I'm right there.
and I think to the tribute of our academic institutions, I think they are increasingly bringing adjunct faculty on. Like a good friend of mine, Joel Peterson. Joel Peterson is the chairman of JetBlue. So the CEO of JetBlue reports to Joel Peterson, right? Joel Peterson has been the CEO of numerous companies, hired, fired, funded, bankrupted, restructured. He's a nearly 30-year professor at the School of Business at Stanford. It's why Joel Peterson's classes are some of the best at Stanford, because the guy is doing it every day in the real world as a private equity guy, as an owner, as an entrepreneur. He understands beyond the academic side of leadership what is the real human side of this.
So, do you think let's just, look at an organization, doesn't matter what they actually produce or anything like that, and they're just chugging along, barely making a profit, and their HR department. Do you believe, and they just look for the quick win, and they're going to send, their middle management person to course X. Do you think that there is a disconnect in kind of the talent management departments of any organizations, on that it is those people that are deciding where to send or develop people, that unless they are developed correctly, unless they know this secret sauce, which really isn't a secret, right, Scott? None of this is a secret. It's just a matter of executing on these type of things. But do you believe there's a huge disconnect on the people that make the decisions, these talent management folks in an organization, to what they should be concentrating on to find their leaders?
I don't. I don't think there's a
Okay.
huge disconnect, because I mean, in 2020, what CEO, what CHRO, what chief revenue officer, what CFO would continue funding that division if she or he didn't think they were, focused on the key competencies that their organization needs? Now, is that every organization? No, I'm sure there are some HR divisions or training and development organizations that need to be more relevant. But I think that ended back in the last recession. I think HR divisions that were disconnected, they were eliminated overnight. And I
Mm.
think they were rebuilt with enormous strategic focus and talent to make sure that the development of their people is what the chief revenue officer or the EVP of sales or the EVP of product development, what she or he needs in their staff. I think the new generation is joining organizations in part because of the role that talent development plays in developing their skills and the relevancy it has. So I think it's easy to, throw out HR and to criticize their irrelevancy. Yes, of course, that exists in organizations, but I mean, this is my focus, right? These are our key clients. I have seen a sea change in the last decade of the uber focus on making sure that talent development, professional development, human resources, people services are investing in the skills that the senior leaders don't see or need to see in their staff. I just, that's a bandwagon I'm not going to jump on. You're not suggesting I do. Yes, of course. Can everybody always be finer focused? Of course. But,
Sure.
we're working with major organizations at Franklin Covey where not just are we selling to the, EVP of HR. I mean, we're selling to the SVP of operations, and she or he is extremely clear on what they need to develop in their teams because either they've had, line managers or platform leaders tell them what's needed. So I think that's changing fundamentally in the industry. Otherwise, they
That's
don't work
beautiful,
there.
Scott.
I mean, they don't work. I mean, if you owned a company, would you allow your, director of employee development do anything other than focus on exactly what you needed? Of course, you wouldn't.
That's right.
I do
That's
think that
right.
happened for decades, but it all changed after 9/11.
Yeah, that's awesome, and it's encouraging to see it from your point of view too. That you're having this tempo of the right focused people sending the right people for the right reasons. So, Scott, we've talked about uh, being in the seat, like actually being a leader to discuss the art and science of leading and all that. So how do you approach clients from where you are when they say, "Oh, you're at Franklin Covey. So are you just the theory of Covey? Are you like how do you get around that? How do you demonstrate? How do you show your CV and say, look, I have actually led. I'm just not a preacher of theory also."
Yeah, it's a great question, but it's not one that I have really faced. I think Franklin Covey in 40 years has built our reputation by having world-class intellectual property, right? We've decided not to be experts in everything. We're not trying to
Yeah.
become the Amazon of professional development or training. We decided to focus very specifically on 7 key areas that we think most organizations face: executing strategy, developing a culture of trust, productivity, leadership development, sales skills, customer loyalty. Right? We have decided in kind of the spirit of Jack Welch, right, and kind of focusing in on what are our key competencies. So we're very very niche oriented. We think we're the best at those 7 things in the world, and therefore we write best-selling books, and we keynote very specifically on that. And so that's not a question that we often get. I think what we usually get is where do we start? Should we start on the 13 behaviors of high trust leaders? Should we start on the 7 habits of highly effective people? I'll tell you what's interesting. We have a massive portfolio when it comes to building behaviors to execute strategy. But let me tell you what most clients hire us for. Most clients hire us, and these are 6 and 7 figure investments to teach people how to manage their time, how to be respectful, how to offer and receive feedback. These are fundamental interpersonal skills, right? How to differentiate between what is urgent and important, how to listen better. Honestly, and oftentimes it's as prominent in the C-suite as it is at the front line because we're humans, right? So we're teaching basic interpersonal skills that unless your grandmother was, in your house 24 hours a day, your parents were working, they were doing their best. You did or didn't learn this in school, and we all have insecurities, and sometimes corrupt cultures reinforce scarce paradigms. So, um, this is where our focus generally goes. We rarely get this question around ethereal stuff because when we describe or when we listen to the kind of workplace they want to develop, it's often our sweet spot. And these are we sometimes hear them referred to as soft skills. No, these are human skills. I mean,
I
Jim,
love that.
I know I'm
You bet.
talking a lot, right? But I mean, I have had the privilege of nearly 25 years of Franklin Covey of hiring literally hundreds of people. I've also had the responsibility of terminating dozens of people. Let your tribe listen to this very carefully. I'm 52. In my 30 years of career, I have never had to fire someone because they lacked the technical skills to do their job, right? They had the chemical engineering degree. They were a Six Sigma master, right? They knew how to forecast a pipeline, right? They knew how to use a Gantt chart or a PERT chart. Every termination was due to lack of interpersonal skills, lack of self-awareness, lack of inability to get along with other people, collaborate, share credit, share resources, diffuse conflict, understand how to negotiate a win-win or a third alternative. Every one of my terminations has been because of someone's lack of maturity or self-awareness. They just literally could not work well with others. Even if they were an independent producer, they had to be on time with their share of the project. They had to, forgive someone. They had to communicate effectively. They had to pitch their ideas. And so that's what we do is we
Yeah.
solve those issues that are so still readily at a deficit in most organizations.
Human skills.
That wasn't meant to be a sales pitch at all, right? That's just, these are skills
No.
we all need. Heck, I need them most days, Jim.
So Scott, you in your book talk about very early on in your career, you were kind of a subject to this on the
I was a
bad side
wreck.
of things.
I was a mess. I was a jackass most days.
What? So let's talk a little bit about that because everybody fails. Everybody fails. It's a matter of calling it out. And let's talk about owning your mess because that's really what gave you the idea about this,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. For let me tell you why I wrote the book, can I? Because I think there were thousands of ethereal academic autobiographies of very successful leaders who wrote leadership books that were wholeheartedly unrelatable to the vast majority of leaders like me. And I wanted to call out that leadership is tough. It can be unrelenting and unrewarding. It can be, sometimes fatiguing. I've heard it called adult babysitting. And so I wanted to write a book that just called out leadership is not for everyone, and including me. I'm not sure, Jim, that I should have been a leader of people. I think there's a lot of
Hmm.
entrepreneurs and inventors and business owners that launch these businesses, and maybe they should not be the CEO. Maybe they should be the chief visionary officer, the chief revenue officer, right, or the chairman of the board, but maybe they shouldn't be making the day-to-day leadership decisions. I think the purpose of the book is to let me show a lot of the messes and mistakes that I made and have other people who read it. It's done extremely well. I'm humbled by the response it's gotten genuinely to say, you know what? Don't say this, say that. Don't do this, do that instead. Don't think this way, think that way. Avoid the pitfalls and the potholes that I fell into. And so that's why I shared a lot of sort of horrifying, laugh out loud, blush worthy messes that I got myself into.
Yeah. So do you find when you have these lessons and you're going down that and someone's reading the book and they're self-reflecting, what do you think's harder? Is it harder to manage yourself to be looking in the mirror every day and being that person, or is it harder to lead others? What's your opinion on that?
Gosh, I think it's a tie. And that may sound like a
Mm,
cliche, but here's what I've experienced in my career and in my own journey as a leader. None of us, Jim, are as self-aware as we think we are.
yeah.
Not even close. Not even close, right? I mean, and here's some ways to do that. If you want to build your self-awareness, first of all, take a shot of whiskey, and then go ask someone, "What's it like to work for me? What's it
Mm,
like to be on a project with me? What's it like to be married to me? What's it like to be in a meeting with me?" Now, if you've created a culture where it is safe for people to tell you their truth, then you'll learn some things. If everyone says, oh my gosh, you're so fun and you're so smart and you're so collaborative and you're so patient, then you have probably created a culture where it's a kiss up culture.
Yeah.
So the first is, I think it's hard to work on your own leadership skills because you are not as self-aware as you think you are. None of us are as smart and collaborative and timely and abundant, and our breath doesn't smell as good as we think it does, and on and on, right?
You bet.
And once you have, created some better self-awareness for yourself and you understand how you are viewed as a leader, what's it like to work for or with you, then you can also use that self-awareness to model the behaviors you want to see in others. And then you can go out and become a better leader. I mean, generally, I know very few people, including myself and my wife and our CEO and Stephen Covey, and you name it on, that have a level of self-awareness that really empowers them to be a great leader. That's where you've got to start. Brutally honest about your own messes and your own successes.
And when you tie that into the humility and the vulnerability that you talked about before, do you find when you have a leader like that, or someone who starts to have this realization of this is the journey they need to be on, how does that work towards team trust?
Oh my gosh,
How
it
does that?
fundamentally changes it, right? I mean, what a great question. I mean, when is the last time your leader, think about the person that we all report to, when is the last time your leader came to you and said, hey, I'd like some feedback on what it's like to be in one of my meetings, and you felt safe to tell them the truth? Well, as a matter of fact, Jim, your meetings last 3 hours. You schedule them for an hour and a half. They always start 12 minutes late. You talk for 90% of the time, of which 80% of that time is you trying to convince us to come on to your idea. If it's your idea, just tell us we're going to do this, right? Don't try to manipulate us into thinking that it's also our idea. You reserve the right. When you've made the decision, just tell us. And by the way, why do you have 70 PowerPoint slides? Why can't you just, communicate it? I mean, you get the point, right? And so
Yep.
it never happens. That never happens because leaders don't see vulnerability as a strength. They see it as a weakness. And I would argue that vulnerability is a leadership competency. Now, people want to work for confident leaders. People want to work for confident and competent leaders. But you can
Sure.
be confident and competent and still be vulnerable. You can still say, hey, I'd like some feedback on what it's like to be in a meeting with me, and they give it to you. And then the leader takes it a step further and says, wow, that's so helpful. Tell me, when you see me doing that, why do you think I'm doing that? Am I insecure? Am I jealous? Am I nervous? Am I in an area of the business where I don't feel as competent as somebody else? I mean, has your boss ever said that to you? No, no. But that's what
Mm.
creates a culture of trust where everyone can have everybody else's best interest at heart. We can acknowledge our messes, not wallow in them, not license bad behavior, but be really brutally honest around where our strengths are and where our messes are, and then hire around us to complement them. And this may sound like an ideal culture. This is a culture that can be attained when people recognize that you don't have a really good sense for what it's like to work with you. Until you do, you'll never build
Yeah.
a high trust culture.
Amen to that. And so let's go back a little bit to where you said something. I wrote this down, Scott, because I love it. Relationships are the competitive advantage at an organization. So what you're saying though, from a leadership perspective, say you are that senior executive and you're talking to your team, your subordinates, these relationships, it's 360, right? It's 360. It's not just peer to peer.
Of course, I think the world has changed fundamentally in how the new generation that is, coming in waves and displacing, people my age, right? The baby boomers and traditionalists are moving out, and the Gen X and Gen Y, and I guess Gen COVID at some point will come in, and they're demanding a different kind of relationship, right? They don't want this hierarchical relationship. Now, again, hierarchy exists for reasons. I think there's upside and downside to it, but people want leaders they can relate to. They want leaders they can bring their whole self to work with, their sexuality, their credit score, their fears, their passions, their joys, their traumas. People need to be able to bring their whole life to work. And as a leader, you may think, well, nonsense. Work is work and life is life. Not true. I don't know about you, but my phone went off all night long. People from
Of
Asia, people from
course.
South America, people from Europe. I woke up to 70 emails this morning. I'm dealing with someone who's, left her job because of the stress of COVID, and she's
Mm,
on a sabbatical right now, and I'm having to pick up, so I mean, this is life. And
that's
people are
right.
bringing their whole lives to work, and leaders need to be able to be relatable, to have a conversation with people. Because let me tell you, everybody's got something going on in their personal life, and they're all bringing it to the workplace. Everyone's got a teenage son who's vaping. Everyone's got a mother-in-law moving into dementia. Everyone's got a bill they can't pay. And as a leader, if they can't discuss it with you or talk about how it's distracting them, then you're going to be guessing that they're either incompetent or that they're lazy or that they don't care. No, they may have some major thing going on. And if you create the conditions for them to discuss it with you, if you create the culture where it's safe to be yourself, then people might do a better job of being able to focus and bring their all to work if they know that their leader understands what's going on. That doesn't mean that you allow people not to come to work or they spend all day long on the phone with the bill collector, right? I mean, there's lines, and as a leader, it's your job to define those lines and define expectations. But I'll tell you, people don't quit leaders who love them. I said it earlier, but I
Yep.
think it's a very profound and actionable statement. Do your people think and know that you love them?
So, Scott, what changes? You mentioned COVID. What changes in a virtual environment now?
Yeah, sure. One is, I think as a leader, you have to make sure that your paradigm, that your mindset is you're checking in and not checking on. So
Say that
when,
again.
yeah, that you're checking in and not checking on, because people know when they're being checked on. I mean, I see these blogs and I see these articles around leaders being so concerned about worker productivity. There's not a leader in our company that's concerned about worker productivity. I think people are working 30 to 40% harder and more than they were 2 months ago, right? I mean, the line between work and life is gone. I'm working 14 hours a day, every day of the week. It's hard to shut off, right? Because everybody wants to add their value. They want to make sure that their job is secured. So
Yes.
it doesn't even I can't even fathom a leader being worried about, is their team working? Perhaps it exists, not in my realm, nor in nobody that I know. So to answer your question, I think there's this mindset shift. Check in and don't check on.
I
Listen
love that.
more, be really empathetic to what's going on, right? Everybody's kids are running around with their underwear on swords in the house. Everyone's trying to, manage homeschooling. Your spouse, if she or he isn't working, or your partner, perhaps you're a single parent. It's chaos right now, right? People are putting their mortgages into forbearance. People are not paying their car payments. They're worried about whether we have chicken next month, right? And which state's
Yeah.
opening or not, or what will the president say different today than he said yesterday, right? I mean, it's a cluster, you know what? I think one day at a time. I think leaders need to recognize that you can over communicate. I've heard this adage that, leaders can't over communicate. Seriously? Look at the president. And I'm not offering pro or anti-Trump comments here, not the place, and quite frankly don't care. But the president is over communicating.
Mm-hmm.
He's contradicting himself constantly. He's trying to be the genius in the room. Last time I checked, he did not earn an epidemiology degree. And so great leaders recognize where their strengths in. They complement themselves with people who are smarter than them around the topic, and they speak with brevity and clarity. They don't, because the more you talk, the more you are likely to contradict yourself. The more you talk, the more you are likely to say things that you shouldn't. So in the virtual environment, I think be very clear, be as transparent as possible, tell the truth. If you don't know, say, I don't know. If you think it's possible, say, it's possible. I don't know right now. People can handle bad news. What they can't
Right.
handle, Jim, is wrong news or no news.
I love that, Scott, because you're exactly right. You go out there and you look at any leadership blog, you look at LinkedIn articles, all this stuff, and one of the very first things is over communicate in times of crisis. But and then people just flail at that generic message of over communicate in times of crisis.
Yeah, I would say more clear. Yeah, I think better advice is, again, I know why people are saying that, right? It's with good intention, but I don't think it's good advice. I think it is to clearly and consistently communicate, reinforce what you know, be transparent with what you don't, and check in and don't check on.
Yeah, great advice. Absolutely. So, how much more difficult is this, these leadership competencies and the way that we execute upon them, if you were naturally an introvert?
I
This has
don't know
got to
that.
be
Yeah,
paralyzing.
yeah. Well, you can tell I have no relation to being an introvert, right? So this is like I just gave you advice on not being an expert on where you're not an expert. What's interesting, um, Jim? Like you, I'm privileged to host a podcast. It actually now is the world's largest subscribed to leadership podcast in the world. Every week, I interview a different CEO, best-selling author, very similar to your podcast. I interviewed Susan Cain, and Susan Cain wrote the book called Quiet, came out 2 years ago, and it basically is written for introverts. How to thrive in a world of extroverts.
Yeah.
And I think that Jim
Hmm.
Collins, who wrote the book Good to Great, talks about this concept of being a level 5 leader. And one of the attributes he talks about is level 5 leaders are usually not loud, boisterous, charismatic people. They generally have confidence, they are more quiet, more reserved, and they're just as influential and respected as those with people like me that have very loud, domineering personalities. So I would think in some ways that introverts might even be the preferred style when there's so much trauma and drama and uncertainty and fear going on. Quite frankly, I'd rather be with someone, I'm a raging extrovert. I would probably rather right now be led by someone who is a little more calm, a little more deliberate, and a little less flamboyant. So I think it might be the time for or introverts to really shine right now.
It's such a great point, and I think it's another great lesson that you're teaching all of us here is our iron is sharpening iron. That one way isn't the right way, and that you're very self aware, right? You are so self aware on the type of personality that you have. You can look across that table, see someone that's the complete opposite, and see the strengths within that.
Can you say that louder so my wife can hear? Because I don't think she would say I'm very self-aware. But to you, can I tell you to your point? And I think I have a long way to go on self-awareness. But I also think that that it's a journey, right? Because you can be self-aware and then ignore it, right? I
Mm.
can be aware that my charisma and my vocabulary or my stamina can turn me into a bully. And
Yeah.
so my wife will tell you, who's very educated and highly competent, stay-at-home full-time mom and manages our home and our finances and the business of being Scott Miller, if you will. Stephanie will tell you, you can't win an argument with Scott because I'll just fatigue you. I mean, you know, you can be a lot smarter than me, but I'll just wear you out. So I have to be really thoughtful and careful not to let my stamina and my passion and my energy turn me into a bully because I'm very aware of that. But if I'm deliberate on winning a point, I'll just wait you out. I think self awareness is probably half of it. What do you then do about it? How do you modify your behavior to make sure that people want to be in a meeting with you? I know a lot of people that are very competent, Jim, that I don't invite them to meetings because they make it harder. Honestly,
Mm.
they fatigue the hell out of you. And so there are people that don't get invited to my meetings because they make it harder. And how sad, right? And I've told them this, I've had this feedback with them, and they understand and they don't change. Or they swing the pendulum because they're so injured or so bruised, they swing the pendulum so far, everyone wonders what's going on with them? What happened to them?
Right.
And
Because
it's like,
now they're not
seriously? Yeah, seriously? I mean, the only option was to become the opposite? Come on, grow up.
them. So, Scott, I want to kind
Yeah,
of
hey Jim,
probe.
you haven't hung
Yeah,
up on me yet, right? So we're still going.
right. I want to probe one more thought on you here as we're getting towards the end of the podcast, and it's on coaching. So, we have all of this great knowledge that you've kind of given to us here in the last 45 minutes, but how do you what's your perspective on coaching, the importance of coaching, your viewpoint on what's the difference in coaching to mentorship? What's the difference in just providing feedback, telling that person you're not invited to the meeting because you fatigue me? How do you view coaching, and how do you view the importance of it?
Jim, I was privileged to co-author a second book that became a Wall Street Journal bestseller called Everyone Deserves a Great Manager: The 6 Critical Practices for Leading a Team. The first practice in this book is called Develop a Leader's Mindset. And the whole concept behind this practice is that a leader, once you become a leader of people, your job is no longer to get results on your own. That your primary role is to get work done with and through other people. Think about that. I said this earlier. If you believe that your job as a leader is to, in fact, get work done with and through other people, you fundamentally reprioritize how you spend your time. No longer do you rush in and save the day. No longer is your mindset that my people aren't capable, so if I want it done right, I'll just do it myself, which a lot of us think, and then we become martyrs and victims because now we're doing all the work because we never took the time to coach and mentor other people. So if you believe that your job is in fact to get work done with and through other people, then you change. You slow down. You become more patient. You become more appreciative of other people's skills and weaknesses. You realize that you do have the time. You must make the time to coach other people, not rush in and save the day, but to sit down and teach them, what a quality outcome looks like. They might choose to get there in a different way than you. I think coaching and mentoring are very similar. Mentors tend to be more, I think, senior people that go to for advice and wisdom. I think coaching is more about skill development and some self-awareness. I think a leader's job as a coach, there's so much coaching going on, and coach in real time and player as coach. I think if you're going to really develop capability in the organization, if you're thinking more long-term than short-term, then coaching becomes natural to you. At the same time, recognize that not everybody wants to be coached the same way. Some people, it's just like, I have 3 boys, 6, 8, and 10.
Oh
Right now,
boy.
right now, they're all pissing me off because they're fighting over Legos, and I'm ready to throw the whole damn batch out. And I threatened this morning. I said, I'm taking them all to the
Uh-oh.
church. Um, I might just call their bluff on this, so be careful. Watch for my Facebook feed. My
There you
point
go.
is, I can treat my boys all fairly and still treat them differently, right? And the same with your team is you can treat people fairly but treat them differently. So some people like coaching in private, some like it in public, some like it on a walk, some like it via email, some like it in real time, some like it a little later on. So if you're going to have this mindset shift that your job is to build capability, then you'll realize how you coach each of your team members a little bit differently than another one.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Well, Scott, I can tell you this, that you have built our capability here at the Iron Sharpens Iron Tribe with and through your knowledge
Thank you.
today. It has been an amazing conversation. 3 pages of notes easily, and some great leader takeaways. So, Scott, I'll leave you with one last thought that you'd like to pass along to the tribe.
I think the most profound thing that Dr. Stephen R. Covey ever said, of course, the author of the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, 30 years, 40 million copies sold, is that with people, slow is fast and fast is slow. That a lot of us have both an efficiency paradigm and we have an effectiveness paradigm. He wrote the book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, not The 7 Habits of Highly Efficient People. And there's a time to be efficient, mowing your lawn, taking out the garbage cans, some meetings and some texts. But a lot of very successful, productive leaders have had an efficiency mindset, and it's worked well with them in life. But it doesn't work well with people. You cannot be efficient with people. You must be effective. So slow down. With people, slow is fast, and fast is slow.
I love it, Scott. I love it. Thanks again for your time today, and we are all better for having this conversation with you.
Thank you, Jim. Stay safe, man.
Thanks for joining our leadership movement this week. Talking to Scott about the importance of relationships as a competitive advantage and the core competencies to get you there was a great chance for all of us to check ourselves in the mirror every day and take some action. So don't forget our show notes are posted on the website with key leader takeaways, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast. Tell a friend so we can continue to build the tribe. Don't forget to also join our Facebook group so you can get some more behind the scenes action. Until next time, remember that iron sharpens iron. Make yourself and others around you better every single day.